Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. This is a garden question and answer video. This is an extra one I'm doing this week. Over the last few weeks, there have been just so many great questions that I haven't gotten to in the normal Sunday garden question and answer video that I put together some of those questions from those older videos and into an extra one this week. So there'll still be one on Sunday, and you can ask gardening questions down in the description of this, or down in the comment section. That's where you ask your questions. I am standing on the Mississippi River, on the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River, sunrise over here over Memphis coming this way, doing some traveling. You guys have seen video at this point from gardening with Creekside a week or so ago. That was from this trip. Video with Dr. Armitage, videos with a couple videos that I shot at the at Ram and Tom Giberson's house. That was part of this trip. And still out on the trip. So thank you guys very much for following along with the content that's going up. And again, Mississippi River as a backdrop is not a bad deal. Holly is here and she's enjoying the river, but I couldn't let her just wander about in the space where I'm standing. So she won't be in this video. But if you follow me over on Instagram at HortTube, there'll probably be a few photos over there, because her photos tend to be the most popular photos that I put up on Instagram. All right, the Learn to Garden video series should have a video on ground covers going up this week. There's a discount code down below all the videos for $25 off the Learn to Garden video series. And it's over on my website at HortTube.com if you want to learn more about that. Okay, let's jump into some questions. Again, these were questions that were asked over like the last three Q&A videos that I didn't get to. Somebody asked about transplanting a Purple Daydream Loropetalum. They're in Zone 7A in Tennessee. Tennessee's right over there. And wanted to know whether they should do it now or later. This is definitely an example of a plant that I would wait until late winter to transplant. So you're in Zone 7A. That Purple Daydream Loropetalum is hardy in Zone 7A to 9B, so very marginally hardy in Zone 7A. And I'm sure last year in the big freeze, around Christmas time, that he probably lost some Loropetalum over there in Zone 7A, Tennessee. So yeah, be careful moving that until late winter, early spring, and that way it gets a full season to get reestablished before it could take any winter damage. Let's see. So somebody asked about, they get the little cracks in their tomatoes and wanted to know if they're safe. Yeah, they're safe to, there's lots of reasons why you can get little cracks in your tomatoes. One of them is water. When you can be a little on the dry side and then get a lot of rain at one time and your tomatoes will crack. Sometimes if it's going to rain heavily, or I've gotten used to it, so we'll go out and pick tomatoes based on the fact that I know they're about to crack. And then there's various other reasons, nutrient issues, that you can get little fibrous cracks on them. They're safe, but you want to typically avoid canning cracked tomatoes, just in case there's things down in them that you can't see, you can't clean them out, you can't wash them when they're cracked like that. But they're safe to eat, to cut away the good parts of the tomato to eat on a salad or something like that. Just avoid the cracked part, because there is, it is hiding places for things. But yeah, they're safe to eat. Just cut the good part away and eat it, and we do all the time. Somebody had asked me to do videos on foundation plants, or 10 foundation plants that are great. I have lots of videos on the channel for foundation plants. In fact, there's a playlist for foundation plants. If you go back and take a look at it, I've done series where we've done 30 or 40 or 50 foundation plants, or small growing evergreen plants, over the course of 2 or 3 videos, a couple times in the history of the channel. So there's lots and lots of content on foundation plants, and we'll continue to do so. And the video that went up yesterday, as I'm filming this on the channel, was about our planning for the foundation for the house in Raleigh. So lots of foundation stuff. And they said they had bought the Learn to Garden video series and loved it. So thank you very much for that. And somebody asked if Ram's garden has venomous snakes. If you live, if you live in the southeast or the southwest, and probably up into I don't really know, probably up in the Pacific Northwest as well. You have the opportunity to run across many venomous snakes over the years. It's just not something. I mean, you just move on with life and garden like normal. I had copperheads at the old house. I had water moccasins at the nursery. I had, it's just something that, if you're outside in an area that has poisonous snakes, you're just going to run into one at some point. It's just kind of the way it is. The main thing is I wish people would not kill every snake they ran into, because what I've seen over my lifetime, and I think I've said this in a past video, is I've seen more and more and more and more copperheads over the course of my life. It just becoming the more and more the predominant snake that I see in our area in North Carolina. And I think it's because it's such a well camouflaged snake that when humans are killing, some portion of humans are killing virtually every snake they see, the ones they see are the black snakes and some of the snakes that could actually be helping us out controlling copperheads. Some of the snakes that actually eat copperheads. And what we're left with is the snake that happens to be the most, it's a beautiful snake, and it's also extremely, extremely well hidden because it's so beautifully camouflaged in fall leaves, especially. And fall's a dangerous time for copperheads in our area, just because it's, they're in the leaf litter, and they're very, very hard to see. They're also, again, they're beautiful. But again, if you see, black snake, especially, like an eastern, especially like an eastern king snake, leave them be. They eat other snakes. If you're scared of the venomous ones, leave the non-venomous ones for sure. Let's see. Somebody asked if their serviceberry tree can be topped to help it fill out. So I guess it's just one long branch heading up, or a couple from, just way, way up. Yeah, absolutely. You can cut it at the height, kind of where you want it to branch at, and rescue it that way. Yes, that wouldn't be a problem on a serviceberry. Let's see. And then once you do that, you're going to get weird growth. You're going to get growth down at the suckers down at the bottom that are going to need to be controlled. You're going to get suckers halfway up that are going to need to be controlled. Once you make that cut, you're going to get crazy amounts of growth, and then you'll get to controlling it, keeping only the things that are coming out that you want to keep. Let's see. Somebody asked if they can plant their sage in with their ornamental garden, or meaning they're in their shrubs and all those kinds of things, or if it just needs to go in a vegetable garden. I think this is a great question, because some folks just think about a vegetable garden and then the flowering plants or non-flowering shrub plants as two separate things. Like, they have to be completely different. Like, there's going to be two different types of soil you're going to use, and two different types of maintenance you're going to do, and two different types of whatever you're going to do. But they're just simply not. All the prep that I go about doing in a garden is good for both edible plants, vegetables, and that kind of thing, and your ornamental shrubs and trees. So they're not separate in my mind. And if you have the opportunity to plant your sage is absolutely, it's a salvia, and it blooms and it has beautiful foliage. It's absolutely a great ornamental plant to blend in. But so are your tomatoes and your peppers and your squash and your zucchini and all of those kinds of things. I really wish that's the big thing about that little lot in Raleigh, is there's only one space in the back that's truly sunny all day. And so I have my vegetables congregated there. I would not have my vegetables together like that if the whole back garden was sunny. I would have them spread out across the entire back garden and be part of the ornamental landscape, which is the way I'd actually like to teach it, because again, there's no difference. They are annual plants, meaning that I'm taking, either they're living one season and dying, or they're growing one season and I'm taking them out at the end of the season, because the freeze is going to kill them. And so I do add some additional compost in between those plantings, or some pine bark soil conditioner or something like that, just to regenerate that soil a bit, because I'm trying to get a lot out of my annual plants. But that's the only difference. And if I planted my tomatoes over there instead, I would just add a little compost to that area, and then the next year I could plant them over there. But it doesn't matter what it is. If you can blend them into your ornamental garden, they can be part of your ornamental landscape. And I would absolutely encourage you, especially with herbs, with oregano and thyme are just great ground covers. Sorrel's beautiful, although the rabbits and the deer will think so as well. And your sage, which won't get eaten by those animals, it's just a great ornamental plant. But yeah, I like to have them blended in to the rest of my garden if I could. Let's see. So somebody asked about mulching before or after leaf drop. So I just talked about last week the ideal time to mulch, and I think it's early March, and then sometime about now in the fall to prevent the kind of winter weeds from germinating. But if you have a big leaf drop coming, I'd let the leaves drop first for sure. And that may be that you don't have to mulch this time of year. The leaves can be the mulch that prevent a lot of the weed things from germinating. But I let the leaves drop, especially in the garden in Raleigh, because the 90% of the leaves I get are from one single oak that's actually off the back property line, and it just buries everything in leaves. And those need to be thinned out and cleaned up a bit, and then I can mulch over top of that. But if I mulched first, they would just get absolutely buried in leaves. So it's a great question. If you have a big leaf drop coming and you're planning on mulching, I would let that happen. And then again, thin them out if you need to. I don't want 6 inches of leaves piled up around anything in the garden. I want to use all the leaves that I have, but I want to thin them out over the entire garden. And not just concentrated. So somebody asked if they should leave their magnolia leaves in the bed. This is a great question. Magnolia leaves are, if it's an evergreen magnolia, kind of a pain. And they just are. Gardening with an evergreen magnolia is just not, it's difficult. All the evergreen magnolias that are in the neighborhood in Raleigh dominate the space they're standing in. They absolutely dominate the space they're standing in. Nothing grows under them. Between the dropping the leaves and dropping the little modified, cones, the seed pods, and just that constant debris, plus the fact that they're so dry underneath one of those things. It's like no water can make it through that entire plant to get down to the ground. It just hogs everything. There can be difficult to garden with, although beautiful. Great native plant, and there's one off the back property line at the house, and I'm glad that's where it is. I get to enjoy it without it actually dominating the garden. But in terms of leaving the leaves underneath them, completely depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you are trying to grow things under it, yes, you're going to have to remove those leaves. What you can do is take those big giant leaves and put them on the driveway and run your lawnmower over it, or get some sort of leaf shredder and shred them a little bit, make some edges on those leaves, and then they'll break down. Otherwise, it takes forever for one of those giant leaves to break down. So that's what I would do, is I would shred them and then just reuse them for something else in the garden. Let's see, from another list. We'll start another list of questions. So somebody said, why is there so much variety and labeling for mature size? And so this is true. You can probably Google dwarf Burford hollies right now and find that somebody says they get 4 to 6 feet. And if I was, in the video I have for it, the one that was at the nursery that I was filming was 12 feet tall. So I could put a label that says that dwarf Burford hollies get, 8 to 12 feet easily. And so there is a wide variety. There can also be, we have a much longer growing season in Raleigh than they would in Michigan. And so if you were trialing a plant in Michigan and it stayed 3 to 4 feet and it was super compact, and then you released it out on the world, and we have a 2-month longer growing season in the South, that plant might actually add a foot or 2 extra before it actually blooms that season. So there can be that as well. It could just be no one's trying to deceive anybody. It's just, the length of the growing season can have an impact on it. So there's various reasons. Plus there's, somebody writing, and, there's a lot of copy and paste, out in the world. So, people want to know how big something gets and they Google it, and that's their version of fact, rather than having spent some period of time out in the world with the actual plant, watching it grow. Again, plants don't have off switches. So when I think about the mature size on a plant, when you're reading that on a tag, I would really, in your mind, think about that as maintainable at. So if that dwarf Burford holly tag says 4 to 6 feet, is maintainable between 4 and 6 feet. But doesn't have an off switch that at 6 feet it just stops growing. It may start to grow slower, as it reaches certain heights, over time, but it's not going to stop growing. And so again, the one I had that we took cuttings off of at the nursery was at least 10 by 10, possibly 12 by 12 round ball. It was gigantic, absolutely gigantic. So that's some of the reasons, that labeling is going to be all over the place on plants. It's partly is it's the biggest one that person has seen, and so that becomes their version of the label for that, for that particular plant. But again, I would do them as maintainable at, and it's another reason why it's good to get out and go to gardens and visit places. I mean, we were at I was at Duke Gardens a few weeks ago, and there was a Globosinana cryptomeria there that was, 8 feet tall, probably. And I think every tag you'd ever see for a Globosinana cryptomeria would say, 4 feet, something like that, probably. Again, there's no off switch on the thing, so that's where you get. If they were going to make a label for Globosinana cryptomeria, they would say it gets 6 to 8 feet tall. Somebody who's grown them on their foundation for the last 20 years and have pruned them occasionally would say they only get 3 to 4 feet tall. So there you go. Can Canjiro Sasanqua camellia easily be pruned to keep it small, or should they transplant it? I would definitely transplant it. Camellias can be pruned for size control. They are extremely slow to come back from very hard pruning. So as an example, I've got a neighbor right at the beginning of COVID had, I think probably Canjiro. Canjiro is an older variety of Sasanqua. It's very popular. It's a reddish single flower, not quite red, pinkish red. Great. It was always a great variety to use. They're much more improved, cleaner foliage, nicer flowering Sasanquas now, but Canjiro is still out there in the world. They had some that were probably 7 feet tall, blocking their front porch, and they cut them down to like 3 feet tall. It's taken 3 years for them to look normal again, and probably will bloom this fall finally. So it was like, maybe they had a few blooms on them last year, but it took a long time. So, that's something to keep in mind. I'd probably move that plant if you thought you were going to have to size control it for years and years and years, just because they're so slow to recover. Somebody asked, are sterile plants truly sterile? And I think this question comes from things like the Calorie pear or Bradford pear, which when it was introduced was said to not produce viable seed, and now perhaps is on its way to being the worst invasive plant, certainly that I've ever seen. I mean, I see the Elaeagnus everywhere, and the Japanese privet everywhere, and the kudzu everywhere, and on and on, and the Japanese stilt grass. We know all the invasives, right? And I've done videos on a lot of those invasives, but it looks like to me the Calorie pear probably will be the worst invasive plant that we've ever unleashed. It is awful. But that plant was never sterile. It just didn't have the right dance partner, and so a particular pear comes along that will, crosses with that flower and produces viable seed, and then it's on its way. And there's no amount of cutting Bradford pears down that will even matter. I've disliked Bradford pears since day one, the big lollipop trees with the stinky flowers. I never liked them, but cutting, now there's, like I think it was South Carolina was paying people to take them down, or they were giving people free trees if they would take them down or whatever. Doesn't matter. doesn't matter if they come down now. They're already released out in the woods. They're producing their own seed now. We're going to need an insect or something to come along and slow it down, because otherwise it's not going to be slowed down. So that is a truly terrible plant that was initially, I don't know that anyone ever called it sterile. They just said it didn't produce, viable seed. But the plants that are being released now that say sterile, they're mostly complex hybrids that people are producing to prevent them, from producing viable seed. We've known how to do this for a long time. This is not new information. It's just new thing that's entering the world of ornamental plants. And the ones that say sterile in newer varieties are in fact sterile. So we've seen that in butterfly bushes. We've seen it in barberries. We've seen it in grasses, some interesting ornamental grasses. And so you see lines of plants coming out that will, are going to say worry-free or sterile or whatever. But we're going to see it more and more and more. The fixing of some of our, what amount to great ornamental plants that are problematic with our natural environment around us. But yes, the sterile plants are truly sterile. The problem is we had some older things that were thought, they were guessed to be sterile instead of scientifically proven to be sterile. Those are two very, very different things. Well, I've never seen it produce a seed. Or I've heard from people I've asked in the past about certain plants to experts, and they'll say, well, it produces a smaller amount of seed. Well, that's still producing seed, right? So that's not sterile. Or we haven't seen it produce a seed. That's not sterile either. We know how to do it. So the ones that are being labeled sterile, that are newer introductions, I think we can trust going forward with that. But old ones, no. Let's see. So somebody has a pineapple guava they bought, and they're in Durham, North Carolina, which is zone 7B or 7A maybe by the time you get to North Durham. It's marginal, definitely, in your area. Should they keep it in the garage or plant it in the ground through the winter? That's probably one I'm going to leave in a container and bring in and out. So any night that's above 25 degrees, I'm probably just going to leave it outside. It's not that marginal that it would be killed. Let's say 28 degrees. Every night is 28, and I would leave it outside, put it in the garage if it's below 28 through the winter, plant it in late March, early April, something like that. I have a pineapple guava in the ground at the house, no problem whatsoever. But it was definitely spring planted the first year that it went into the ground. So somebody asked how they can control their Solomon seal. So that variegated Solomon seal, and we have it at the house as well, can really get out of control. The spot that it is at the house has the driveway on one side of it. It's contained in concrete, basically. That's the only way I'd want to grow it. Otherwise, it just can be a pain to garden with. Now, that doesn't mean all variegated Solomon seal, though. There are some varieties that have more interesting variegations and things that are much slower growing. But the regular variegated Solomon seal can really get, over time, really pick up momentum and start to take over garden and come up just everywhere in all of your plants. But the only way to really control it is to have it planted in a container or planted where you have a sidewalk and some sort of space that you can push it back into. So create some sort of barrier around it. It takes a few years for it to get, to really take off like that. So 2, 3, 4 years before it, all of a sudden you go, oops, that's going to grow too fast. Somebody asked what classifies sun or shade, and then does areas with high shade affect that at all? So where the limbs on the trees are cut up much higher in the canopy, it definitely has an impact. And if you look at the videos from the Giberson garden, that entire garden is shade, but the trees have been limbed way up. The large shrubs have been limbed way up. The ornamental trees have been limbed way up. And so there's a ton of bright light in there, even though there's an over canopy, there's a canopy up over top of it. And so she's got this incredible mix of sun and shade plants growing together. I showed one spot in the video the other day with an Akuba right next to a salvia that, you know, the salvia was getting enough sun in the spot that it was in, and the Akuba was getting enough shade for the spot that it was in. So high shade is ideal for almost everything because it gives the full sun plants get enough light bouncing around in the under canopy, and the shade plants get enough protection on their roots, you know, from the direct sun just pounding on them. But what classifies sun or shade, you know, I would say that sun needs to be 6 hours or more of direct sun, and it's kind of important that it's in the middle of the day. It's the time of day you need to put sunscreen on. If you tell me you're getting 3 hours of early morning sun and 3 hours of late day sun, that's definitely not full sun. That's definitely a part shade or part sun type of condition. So not only is it 6 hours or more of direct sun, it needs to be a good amount of that kind of 10 to 4 sun for us to call that direct sun. And then there's definitely an impact on where you live, and I've talked about this, you know, recently. Before I get to that, continuing on that, if it's shade, I think it's 4 hours or less, something like that. That 4 to 6 hour spot would be part sun, part shade, something like that. I've got videos on the channel. Videos on the channel for this, but this is another one of those things I talked about. You know, why is there so much, you know, why is it so all over the place on the labeling for mature size, and that having some impact on whether it's being grown in the south or grown in the north. So the same thing with sun or shade as well. So if I tell you that it's a full sun plant in Raleigh, North Carolina, you know, those of you, if you can grow the thing down in Houston, that may not be a full sun plant for you. You know, you may need to put that thing, and I've said a lot of the Asian plants that are labeled zone 7 to 9, those plants, as you get toward areas with more intense sunlight, you know, around the Gulf, and especially the western part of the Gulf, you probably need to put those plants in some shade where I'm putting them in the sun in Raleigh. So that can have some impact on where you're placing your plants as well, just the area of the country that you're living in. But I do have videos for sun and shade on the channel. Somebody asked if you can take hardwood cuttings from evergreen shrubs when they're dormant. Yes, but hardwood cuttings are much harder to root overall. With some exceptions, some things root, you know, quite easily. And we took cuttings 12 months out of the year at my nursery, but I took 95% of the cuttings that we did in a year from about May 15th until July 15th. That window where you have semi-hardwood cuttings, where the plants leaf out in the spring and they have all that super soft new growth on them. Maybe it's a flowering plant that flowers then, and then it has super soft growth. As those new branches start to mature just a bit, we call that semi-hardwood cuttings. And those are going to be available for me in my area from about May 15th to about July 15th. In the north, a little bit later than that, probably June 15th to August 15th, something like that. That's the window where virtually everything I grew in the nursery could be rooted. And then we would concentrate more in the winter on division. So if we were dividing liriope or mondo grass or other ornamental grasses, or we were dividing ground cover, various ground covers, all those kinds of things. So we concentrated on division in the winter and cuttings in the summer. And that worked out really well for us. You can, again, take hardwood cuttings. It takes longer to get those things rooted. Somebody asked which hydrangeas are better in shade. Pretty much, I mean, oak leaf hydrangeas, big leaf hydrangeas, mountain hydrangeas. Pretty much most hydrangeas would prefer shade, especially in the south. I don't know where this person is. This is another one of those that, you know, I'm answering a question where I don't know where the person lives. Because if I go up to Michigan, you'll see big leaf hydrangeas in the full sun. In Raleigh, you're going to see big leaf hydrangeas in part shade, and so that has some, you know, definitely has a difference, you know, based on where you live. But overall, the big leaf hydrangeas, the mountain hydrangeas, oak leaf hydrangeas tend to like more shade. Hydrangea arborescens is probably more, it's pretty tolerant of both. And then hydrangea paniculatas tend to need lots of sun. Those are and then climbing hydrangeas, part shade. But they get sun by going up into the canopy. So the top of the plant will end up in the sun, but the bottom part of it tends to be shaded on climbing hydrangeas. So hydrangeas are all over the place. They're the weirdest plant. It's probably now the #1 selling group of plants. It used to be roses and then hydrangeas. I'm sure hydrangeas have now displaced roses as the #1 selling plant because hydrangea paniculatas have become so popular, like limelight and little lime and white wedding and so on and so forth. And hydrangea arborescens, which, forever was just Annabelle. I grew tons of Annabelle hydrangeas over the years and sold them, but with the new hybrids that Tom Rainey has, Invincibelle and all the others, those things have become so popular. And then with the remontant hydrangeas from Bailey's and the blue pots, with the repeat blooming big leaf hydrangeas, that's allowed people in colder areas to be able to have flowers, even if the flower buds get killed on them. And so again, we've seen just through plant breeding, hydrangeas go from this, there were lots of hydrangeas out there, but now it's just an insane number of hydrangeas. And if you look at the tables of shrubs in the box stores and other places, the percentage of the plants that are there that are hydrangeas, different species of hydrangeas, is just it's mind-blowing, and probably will just continue to grow over time. But it's kind of funny that top group of plants would then also be the most confusing, because some bloom on old wood and some bloom on new wood, and some need shade and some need sun and they're just all over the place. But there's lots of videos on the channel for hydrangeas if you want to learn about the different types, different species of hydrangeas. Somebody in Pennsylvania asked about moving Mahonia and some sharp hollies, about the best way to go about it. Unfortunately, you just have to glove up. You can cut them back a little bit when you're transplanting them, but it's just about wearing heavy clothes and going out there and doing it. I've moved and dug out lots of very, very prickly Mahonia in my life, and it's not fun. It's definitely not fun. But again, you could cut them back some in the late winter and then move them with less foliage on them. You can actually wait for them to bloom if you wanted to in March or April, and then move them right after they do that. You could let them bloom and then cut them back hard, and then move them, and they may be a little less prickly doing it that way. Somebody asked if buying organic soil amendments is worth it, just having the word organic on it. Yes, and because I would have said, no. Peat moss should be, if you were buying peat moss should just be organic. It comes from a peat bog up in Canada, and there's not anything like being sprayed over the top of it. So there's this thing where we put non-GMO on green beans, when there's not like a GMO option for green beans anyway. So that was just put on the can in order to scare you into thinking that somebody else's green beans might be GMOs when they're not. So there's that out in the world. And so somebody putting organic on peat moss that was mined from a spot in out in the middle of Canada somewhere is just trying to use a word to perhaps put an extra $1 on the back because it's all organic. But when we're talking about cow manure or mushroom compost or something like that, where it's perhaps come from some sort of farm, it has some sort of farm field ingredients in it, that is probably important, because we do have some chemicals that have some shelf life on them that can make it through the compost process. And so I think that's where it's important. But if it's like a mined product, and it says organic, it was organic anyway. There's that, where people confuse things on purpose in order to be able to, differentiate their product in some way when there is no differentiation in the peat moss coming out of a peat bog in Canada. I'm not telling people to use peat moss from Canada either, because that's what I'm going to get from making that comment. Is people say don't use peat moss at all. I was just using peat moss as an example, that it's all organic because it's coming out of a place that's just being mined, not from a farm. But farm-based products probably should say organic. in order to prevent you from potentially picking up some sort of chemical that has has made it through the compost process and can stunt your plants in some way. So I've talked about using mulch to suppress weed seeds. Will it also prevent some self-seeding flowers too? Yes, yeah. If you have a bed that you're relying on self-seeded flowers, those are beds I would just sprinkle out a small amount of compost over those beds, or pine bark soil conditioner, or some sort of really thin layer of that type of material. And I would not be putting in 2 or 3 or 4 inches of hardwood mulch to, into those spaces. If you're, again, having, self-seeding flowers that come back every year, yeah, you definitely would not want to bury those in mulch. It will reduce the number of them coming up for sure. I always get tons of questions about people using newspaper and boxes under their mulch, to start off their beds, just laying the sheet mulching the area first, and tons of people do it, and to great success. It prevents weeds for some period of time, about the same amount of time probably that any plastic option would have used. I never do it, and the main reason I never do it is because it does. The entire purpose of my gardening technique is to improve the soil. And so there is a period, any block that you're putting down between the organic material you're using and the soil beneath it is a slowdown in the process of improving the soil. And so even though that's going to break down and it's organic and it breaks down pretty quickly, it does initially create a little dry socket between your mulch on the top and the soil down below, and it creates a delay in the process that I'm trying to do. There's nothing wrong with it because it reverses itself and it goes away. So it's not me sitting here being critical. If it's something that you've done and you've had success with it and you like doing it, keep doing it forever. But is it the ideal way to improve soil? No, because it's just a delay in the organic materials that you're putting on the top and the soil being fed by them, having a barrier, whatever that barrier is, even though that barrier breaks down. It does break down a little slower than you think, buried without air, though, slightly, a little slower. Again, I'll take flack for that one just because it's something that somebody does and if you've done it and you've had success with it, do it. But if you're new to gardening, I would put the compost directly on the soil. Last question for this week. Somebody says, are over-the-counter soil testers reliable? I have no idea. I really don't. You probably want to read the reviews on ones that you'd buy on Amazon. If you're trying to get a more broad range of information about your soil, I would probably want to take that to your county extension agent and let the state go through the state testing lab. I think they're probably going to do a good job. There's also Soil Kit is another one that you can buy, I think, from the Home Depot site, and Plants by Mail, I think, sells it as well. They have a fantastic lab down in I think it's in Alabama, and if you're going to spend $25 on some sort of tester that you don't have any idea what it is, you can probably get, for the same amount of money, send it to a better lab. But for me, I can take a soil test from my garden and take it over to NC State, and they have the lab there where farmers bring their soil in and they test it. So I probably do it that way. If there's some question in the back of your mind, if you're just testing for soil pH, I think a pH tester off of Amazon is fine. If you're testing for just a couple basic things, like some sort of moisture, some sort of one that just detects moisture and pH and just some basic soil temperature, basic functions, they're probably fine. But a more in-depth soil test, I think I would send that off to the state or a reputable lab in the country that test soil for farmers. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching, following along with the channel, and I'll be back on Sunday with this week's question and answer video. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.